Silly old board, thought Thomas.
Peep, peep, stop, stop.
And we're back. We were all little kids once, and we've all had our fair share of children's shows. Whether it be Barney, or Teletubbies, or Booba. And today we'll be looking at one of those, that being a little blue train named Thomas. Thomas and Friends is a franchise that started way back in the 1940s by a man named Wilbur Awdry, made as short stories to tell his son Christopher, who had measles at the time. Nearly 40 years later, it was adapted for a television series aimed to tell stories to children by Britt Allcroft and her amazing team. However, you may be wondering why it took nearly 40 years to adapt the series to television, and I wondered the same thing until I wandered down the mine of the lost Thomas and Friends pilot. Haha! Last time I tried putting audio from an intro, I got copyright claimed, so I'm not gonna put the theme here. The franchise started off as a series of books called the Railway series, written back in the 1940s, whilst Awdry's son Christopher was sick with the measles. The first set of stories he wrote was eventually adapted into the book called The Three Railway Engines, about three of the characters, Edward, Gordon, and Henry, and their escapades on the fictional island of Sodor. In 1943, after encouragement from his wife, the Reverend W. Awdry submitted his stories to Edmund Ward for publication. The Railway series exploded, and children fell in love with the engines, and in 1946, Awdry wrote the second book in the Railway series, Thomas the Tank Engine. In 1953, the BBC approached Eric Marriott, editor for the Railway series, with the intention of adapting the stories from the three railway engines. This was a massive failure at the time, as it was a live production. During the live production, the model train derailed, and a crew member's hand had to put it back on the rails. This understandably made Awdry a little displeased, and after the BBC tried to make up for the deal, the second episode of the adaptation was cancelled. No footage is confirmed to exist, due to the scarcity of VCRs at the time and it being a live production. After that project lost interest, another person caught up to it, attempting to adapt the series in 1976 as a 2D musical show for children. A prime example of this animation type is the series Ivor the Engine. This project took a lot of effort. However, the whole thing was cancelled due to the American market not grabbing interest in it, and thus Awdry withdrew from the adaptation projects. Enter 1979, and a young filmmaker named Britt Allcroft is making a documentary about a heritage railway in Sussex called the Bluebell Railway. While doing her research about the topic, she read some of the Railway series books and felt a connection with them. She reached out to Awdry and convinced him to sell her the rights for the TV adaptation for 50,000 British pounds. In 1981, she had acquired those rights and began her massive project. She worked with David Mitten, a model maker and TV writer, to help develop the series. There were various options considered, 2D animation, claymation, and even stop motion. However, they finally decided on model trains with the integration of stop motion if needed. In 1983, the team created an early low-budget pilot pitch for various networks. It was based off of a story in the 8th book in the Railway series, Gordon the Big Engine, the story being Down the Mine. The story follows Thomas the Tank Engine wanting to go past a warning sign in the lead mines. He always attempts this, but his drivers hold him back. Until one day, he is able to knock them out and keep going. However, he falls deep into a hole due to the ground not supporting his weight. Upon this revelation, the fat director determines the only way to get him out is by another engine pulling him. However, the only engine capable of doing that would be Gordon, the big engine who Thomas previously teased at the beginning of the story. Gordon pulls Thomas from the mine, and the two agree to be friends. Great story, 10 out of 10. Gotta find somebody to be my Gordon and my Thomas. Anyways, this pilot was produced with a lot less than the production value of the actual series. The pilot included less models and a smaller set. The models were actually handcrafted and scratch-built by a man named Martin Gill. These models were a lot more simplistic than the actual models, though. They were made using plastic as opposed to the final models being made of brass. It took 3 business weeks to develop this project, and Britt Allcroft even mortgaged her house to fund this. Talk about dedication! The pilot has been lost, as it is unknown who could possibly have it. The models were eventually rebuilt, and the old ones were used as background props for scrap, so that's kinda sad. There is only a bit of remaining footage of the pilot, the most well-being from the actual episode from the first series, where they reused footage from the pilot in the episode. This is the old Thomas model. You can see he looks a lot more basic here, as his front splasher is missing the red paint lining and his side rods appear to be much more thick. Here's a comparison of the pilot model to the actual model. Yeah, if you're new to this, you probably don't see much of the difference, but this was a show that I watched as a wee lad, so I naturally know. Also, I obsess over extremely small details, but that's not the point. First place the search began was a website called the Sodor Island Forums. I connected with them through Twitter and shot them a DM, although I got nothing back. Now, I do know a lot about Thomas and Friends in the model series, as I love model trains. David Mitten, the model maker, was the man who owned a copy of every Thomas and Friends episode due to his filmmaking. However, Mr. Mitten passed away in 2008, so we're unable to contact him, and regardless if I was able to contact his family or whoever inherited his belongings, they've already been aware of lost media for a while. You see, there's another piece of Thomas and Friends lost media called The Missing Coach, an episode that was partially filmed in the second season but was scrapped due to a confusing storyline. Lost media hunters like myself went looking for it and determined the only person who could have had it is David Mitten. However, there are various pictures of the episode out there. I thought to reach out to Britt Allcroft herself, however the owners of Thomas and Friends have changed over the years. The Britt Allcroft company itself was bought out by Hit Entertainment, who was later sold to Mattel, one of the biggest toy brands in the US. I found Britt Allcroft on Facebook and decided to message her just to see if that would get me anywhere. Then I fell asleep realizing it was 3:30 a.m. and I had school in the morning. Still, haven't received a response, so I searched further. The pilot was greenlit by ITV, so I went to their website and sent them an email. It's been almost 40 years, so obviously I really wasn't expecting them to know anything, and thus I carried on. I like to find all of my contacts in one day, that way I don't have to juggle between finding people and my schoolwork. I found a crew member that had actually been interviewed and was questioned about his work on the pilot, although it didn't reveal much. That individual was Christopher Knowlton, a modeler for the series, making different sets like signal boxes and buildings. I shot him an email and asked if he knew anyone who might still have it, but unfortunately he didn't. I then thought back to my Me and My Friends search and figured that the music production would be a great place to reach out to. There were two musicians who made iconic Thomas and Friends themes, those two being Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell. Unfortunately, I was only able to contact Mike O'Donnell and sent him a message. A lot of people have asked me personally, why do I email people? Nobody uses email anymore. Well, because if I asked someone's personal numbers, they would probably freak out, and email is a lot more formal and direct. I got an email back from Mike O'Donnell who said that they had no involvement with the pilot, assuming it was only a short test to show how everything worked. That made me wonder if it was truly a full episode or just a test screening. However, it is said that the models were never used prior to being in front of the camera, so I'm not quite sure. When I had emailed ITV, they had actually said they'd look for me, so my hopes were up. However, I'd have to wait 2 weeks before getting a response, so this video was pushed back. Sorry about that. Discord user King Mr. Harvey contacted Britt Allcroft about the pilot, however, it didn't yield that much of a result. I began to wonder, this was a pilot developed over 40 years ago. However, what other content was there remaining of it? You see, there are various people who worked on Thomas and Friends during the production of the first season, however, only a few on that pilot. With Mike O'Donnell not working with anything music-wise, this leaves a few ideas or possibilities involving the pilot. 1. The pilot may not have had music. 2. The pilot uses royalty-free or non-copyrighted music. Or 3. There was a different composer. The no music theory seems to be pretty plausible, taking into consideration that Mike O'Donnell claimed that it was a short test. The royalty-free music actually seems really possible. However, without the internet, I wonder how hard it was to obtain that music. The third theory doesn't make that much sense and is probably the most flawed. If your series gets greenlit, wouldn't it make more sense to keep the music crew rather than get a new one? Another question that lingered in my mind was over narration. The original first series of Thomas and Friends was voiced by Ringo Starr, the guy from the Beatles. However, I don't believe he was brought onto the show for the pilot, as that would be extremely pricey for one episode, much less each episode is around 5 minutes or so. Plus, the team was already short on money, so yeah. This also leaves 3 probable solutions. 1. There was no narration. 2. There was narration from a crew member. Or 3. They used a previous recording. Theory 1 would make sense if it was just a test, as the same with the music. Theory 2 actually seems more reasonable as well, as they would need to show off how the stories would be told. Theory 3, however, is pretty interesting. You see, originally the Reverend W. Awdry recorded the very first narration released in 1957 for 2 stories, Edward's Day Out and Edward and Gordon, from the first book, The 3 Railway Engines. However, there are more audio recordings used for the Railway series books. Years later, the first 8 books would be narrated by Johnny Morris. More recordings were made by Willie Rushton, Ted Robbins, and Michael Angelis. You can go ahead and cross off Ted Robbins and Michael Angelis, as those recordings were made during the productions of the series. The only person I could see reading this off would be Johnny Morris, as he brought more charisma to the characters something you'd want to grab the attention of the audience, which is what the team was aiming for. I'm obviously not saying that Rushton's narrations were bad. In fact, I actually prefer them over Morris. I actually went back and went through a bunch of Railway series books on YouTube just for the research of this video, and I enjoyed it. But in the end, it would be hypothetically more likely for Morris to have done it. I went back through my emails to see who I had already contacted, and who else I could reach out to. I decided to go back to King Mr. Harvey and asked him how I could get in contact with Britt. I understood that she was not in a position to release the pilot if she had it, and Mattel owns all the rights to Thomas. I was up pretty late at night while doing this, 2 a.m. to be exact, so I decided to go ahead and email someone while I waited for a response from King Mr. Harvey. I emailed Christopher Knowlton back, inquiring whether or not the pilot was a test reel or an episode. I felt bad for bothering him, but I needed more information to get anywhere on this pilot. The problem with a lot of lost pilots is that there's such a small niche group working on it, it's impossible to pinpoint anyone specific. After an hour, I got a response from Mr. Knowlton that stated he had never got to see the pilot, but from his understanding, it was fully edited with possibly music and voiceover, but wasn't the length of a full episode. So a full episode in the Thomas and Friends series is around 5 minutes. So whatever narration or music that was done for it has to be less or equal to 5 minutes. I went to YouTube to find narrations of the story by Morris and Rushton. Morris's narration is somewhere around 6 minutes, which puts it over a goal time. I couldn't find any trace of a Rushton narration for Down the Mine, so I was pretty stumped. His narrations averaged around 4 or 5 minutes, making him a likely candidate. While typing this out, it occurred to me that Allcroft's legal team would most likely have to acquire the rights to use one of the narrations, so it was increasingly likely that a team member dubbed it. All of the information I had somehow was contradicting itself. Whenever I tied something to something else, it wouldn't make any sense. How was it a pilot episode if it wasn't even considered an episode? How was it a reel if it had all the necessary conditions to be an episode? Things were coming up extremely inconclusive, and I started to worry that the information that I had would get me nowhere. I set out on a small adventure to look for any sort of contact with Britt Allcroft whatsoever. I found an email address and sent it something hoping to receive a response. I would have to wait a bit since it was around 3 a.m. in the UK when I sent it, but I was sure this was definitely worth the wait. That next morning, I had received an email from Britt Allcroft, essentially answering all the questions that were products of contradiction. Dear Tyler, I'm happy to share as follows. Down the Mine was, indeed, fully completed with Ringo Starr as the storyteller, with Mike and Jr.'s wonderful score. I already had a commitment from ITV to buy the series, and so it wasn't so much of a pilot as it was a showcase episode to introduce Thomas at a special private screening. I hope this helps, and good luck with everything. I wrote the screenplays for the first 5 series as they were/are mini-films, not book stories although. Of course, based on the Railway series. The Britt Allcroft Presents at the opening was part of each film because I thought of each and every one of them as a present from me for every child watching them. Best, Britt. So, this really cleared up a lot of things for me. It appears that ITV had already bought it, so Britt's production team was free to spend that money, which included getting Ringo Starr to voice it, and Mike and Jr. to compose it. They most likely recorded the score and were unaware that it was used for the special executive screening. The screening showed off Thomas as an introduction to show what kind of vibe the show was going for. I had finally gotten the answers I needed, but where exactly is this pilot today? I have a couple of theories. 1. Mattel has it and owns the right to it and won't release it unless they want money. 2. ITV actually has it in their archives, but it's listed under something different than what I asked for. Or 3. Britt has it and can't release it for legal reasons. My 4th theory, although, is that David Mitten has it. The reason I haven't brought him up, despite the fact that he filmed almost all of Thomas and Friends, is because of his passing, which I mentioned earlier. I didn't want to bother his family with something really obscure from the 80s, which they understandably have nothing to do with. His family has already been contacted enough by people looking for footage of another lost episode, The Missing Coach. So, I would much rather not intrude on a family for something like a missing 5-minute clip. So, that concluded my search. I may not have gotten the pilot, but I had answers to many of the questions that have been presented to me along the way. I know a lot of people would prefer the pilot found, but honestly, I'm just glad it's a lot more clear, rather than having a little tidbit of information found in old Thomas and Friends forums and fandom sites. Obviously, the search for this is not over, but the fact that we have new information for something nearly 40 years old is just mind-boggling, as you would think that the test of time would have an impact on the spread of information as people's memories start to fail. However, I guess Thomas is eternal, so to this little Tenkenchin and all of his friends, I say, keep on puffing. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and consider subscribing. It's free. You can also click that bell notification to be alerted of all my next uploads. Tell me what you think in the comments below and in my community tab. This is Sewer Reviewer, and I will see you all in the next video. Peace!